Nine Degrees. Bye-bye.
Hello everybody, a very warm welcome to Talking Business Weekly with me, Aaron Heselhurst. Let's go and take a look at what's on the show. Taking a stand or taking a profit from climate change to racism, gay rights and the war in Ukraine. Just why do companies feel the need to get involved in the big social issues of the day? A number of big American companies have spoken out on abortion and offered to help staff with travel costs. But is it worth their while, or should they just be sticking to making money for their shareholders? From Wall Street banks to healthcare giants, this expert right there works with them all and will tell me how companies decide to speak up or when they should decide to just shut up. The online review platform Yelp, it's one of America's most outspoken firms. Its diversity chief will tell me why it feels the need to have its say on everything from trans rights to abortion. And in an era of increasing political division around the world, this man, who helps some of the biggest businesses on the planet craft their messages, will tell us why it's up to private companies to lead the way in shaping our society. Wherever you're joining me from around the world, once again, a big hello and a warm welcome to the show. You know, when you buy something in the shops or choose a service from a particular company, how much do you think about their social mission? You know, what role the company plays in society beyond making money for its shareholders. The recent US Supreme Court decision, which outlawed abortion for millions of Americans, prompted some of the country's biggest companies to speak out against the decision. Big names such as Disney, JP Morgan and Facebook owner Meta have told staff they'll cover employee travel expenses for abortions. On other subjects, companies face a tricky balancing act, such as Unilever's recent deal to continue selling Ben & Jerry's ice cream across Israel, the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And sometimes they give in to government demands, such as Amazon restricting LGBTQ search results in the United Arab Emirates. The company says it has to follow the law where it operates, but remains committed to diversity and inclusion. And there are plenty of other issues where big companies are having their say, but doing so, it's not without risk. So why do they do it? Well, a global survey by the marketing giants Edelman found that businesses were seen as one of the most effective agents for positive change, scoring higher than governments and the media. Climate change, yep, it is the issue in which most people want businesses to do more for the benefit of society. Then, economic inequality, workforce reskilling, and access to healthcare. However, overall, people still have their doubts about the role businesses play in society. In fact, 52% say capitalism as it exists today does more harm than good in the world. So I've come here, Europe's busiest shopping hub. It's Oxford Street here in London to find out what attracts people to spend their money with particular companies. Let's go and find out. Race, diversity, climate change, does that have an impact on whether or not you would spend your money with a particular company?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a sucker to brands. So, of course, that all is brand building.
And they get your money?
Yes, of course. Yeah, so I'm willing to pay more if I really have the feeling that a company is doing something good.
If they're not socially responsible, I would think twice before investing, because every penny anyone spends with a company, you're actually adding to their profitability and you're adding to their standards.
I think consumers are already aware of the impacts, and I think businesses should take more responsibility when it comes to climate change.
I don't really look into it. I said, to be fair, I said so much goes on. It's just pretty pointless.
Does a company's moral and ethic values, does it actually have an impact on whether you spend your money with them or not?
It does to some extent, absolutely. But I also think it's really hard at the moment to know which companies are telling the truth or not. There's a lot of greenwashing around. More transparency would be great.
Does a company's corporate and moral values, does that have an impact on whether or not you spend your money with them?
Absolutely. I mean, if they're scandalous or treating their employees wrong or have wrong sense of morals in any subject, yes, absolutely, that would impact how I would spend my money.
One of your biggest issues would be
the moment?
Oh gosh, women's rights, I suppose.
Now, for a company, when reputation matters so much, picking the right causes to publicly support, it can be difficult. Sometimes the backing of shareholders is crucial, and there are a growing number of investors who push companies to take certain positions, like Norway's biggest pension fund, which controls around $65 billion of assets and has stakes in about 7,000 companies around the world.
We do understand that the company's main objective is to make sure that they run their business actively, but at the same time, they also can make sure that it doesn't cause any harm on people or environmental, any other fundamental breaches on some of the norms which we have agreed to respect as a society. And that's why the companies also need to take that into account, and not necessarily just the financial performance. And the other thing is that the financial performance will also be influenced if you are doing quite bad on the social issues.
And in a world where social media amplifies voices and, as we know, there is a shortage of workers, the view of staff also needs to be taken into account. Here's the boss of the world's biggest employment agency.
Workers are looking, first of all, for, I would say, a happy or a pleasant work environment. And that consists of a number of things. That is their colleagues, that is the work they are doing, that is the values of the company and whether they are aligned with their own values. So, sort of happiness in the workplace is really important.
So let's dig into why companies choose to speak out in a world which is increasingly polarized. As the saying goes, you can't please all of the people all of the time, so why bother at all? Paul Argenti is a professor of corporate communications at the prestigious Dartmouth University in the US, and also works with companies ranging from banks such as Goldman Sachs and ING to Japan's corporate giant Mitsui. Paul Argenti, thank you so much for your time, really much appreciated. Paul, let's start with this. Is it fair to say that companies are increasingly getting involved in taking a public stance on social issues?
Yes, they are indeed. And I think this has been going on for at least the last 4 or 5 years. And as issue after issue has come forward, more and more involvement from companies has happened at the same time.
And Paul, why do they feel the need? The need to get involved in everything from abortion rights to forced labor and climate change?
I think a lot of it is pressure from antagonists of all kinds, whether it's NGOs attacking companies or employees who feel strongly and passionately about issues that are coming forward. But there's also been an increase in the role of what business will do in society, particularly in the United States. And I think people look to companies for answers that government used to respond to in the past.
And Paul, I'm wondering, how do they pick what to support or not? I mean, does it have to be aligned to their line of business, or is that separation just not always possible?
So I would say that what companies actually do is completely random depending upon their own experience. What they should do is tie it very much overall to the strategy of the business or the core values that they espouse. And I would say a way of thinking about that would be helpful, a framework, which is one of the things that I've developed to try to help companies with.
And Paul, just tell us a little bit about that framework that you've developed.
So my idea was that companies need to think ahead of time about whether they would respond to particular kinds of issues and come up with a way of thinking about it that isn't ad hoc, which is the way most companies look at this. So in my view, it would start with, is this connected in some way to the overall strategy of the business or the core context of what they do? And examples of that would be, you're in a healthcare business, you're providing healthcare services, and you want to wade into the Roe v. Wade situation and give some advice. So strategically, it should be connected. The second thing that I look for is, can you actually do something about this incident or this issue? And then the last piece of it is, how are your constituencies going to respond? Will most be positive about your decision, or will a significant and important constituent weigh in against you that might cause you more harm than good?
And sort of touching on that a bit more, I mean, what is the business logic behind getting behind a particular cause or position, and the considerations. What considerations does a company need to make?
I think it has to be something that is pretty central to the overall organization, or is something that the leaders in the organization feel passionate about. And I'll give you an example. Like Tim Cook weighed in on climate change very strongly in a shareholders meeting, and there were shareholders who were saying, you know, we don't want to own the stock of a company that is so passionate about this. And Tim Cook said, if you don't support this, you can get out of our stock. That is a very, very bold move by a company, as an example.
And Paul, which stakeholders are considered and consulted, and how do companies balance off competing interests? Because speaking up might not always be the most profitable option for shareholders.
No, it might not. And I think one of the things to think about is, who are your key constituencies? Like, let's start with shareholders, and then we think about our employees and our customers, the communities in which we operate, the suppliers. So, and you have to kind of weigh the situation against those different constituencies and which ones are the most important. So for instance, if you're making a decision that might offend your biggest shareholder, you would think about that really carefully before you dived in and just jumped on that. It would probably not be a great idea to do so. The other thing, Aaron, that we haven't talked about is that sometimes it's best just to say absolutely nothing. Like, you cannot win in this situation. You have no stake in the game. You're not planning to do anything about it, and all of your constituencies are going to be against it.
It does feel like US companies are perhaps amongst those who find themselves most often under pressure to intervene. But I'm wondering, how much is this phenomenon spreading to other parts of the world?
I think it is spreading to other parts of the world. And, it could be, if we think about even a year ago, a company like SoftBank protesting against the Olympics in Japan is a way for that company to weigh in on a very important issue to what was going on there. But what we see primarily is companies that are working in the United States, global companies that are getting some of this heat here in the United States, but that is likely to spread. And you can see it with the war in Ukraine and some of the responses in the UK to companies' participation in Russia and all of that. And I think BP is an example of that. And that you're going to see more and more companies throughout the world have to deal with these issues.
And how much complication do you see, such as when a company operates in different markets where you might have, well, certainly you might have competing sensibilities?
This raises an issue. It's like playing chess in 4 dimensions, right? So if you're a global company today and you're doing business in the United States and you're doing business in Russia and China and Turkey and, in Qatar, say, each of those represents challenges for the business. And again, you have to think ahead of time to what are the repercussions of our actions in each of those markets with each of our key constituencies, and do we really want to wade into those waters depending upon how challenging it is? And I've seen companies not really think that through ahead of time, get into trouble as a result of it. If you go back to the middle of the 20th century, companies didn't have to think about these things. So it's very new for many of them, even though it's been around for 50 years. Companies are still trying to think about some of these challenges.
Professor Paul Argenti, a real pleasure having you on the show. Thanks for your time, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. A pleasure to be with you, Aaron.
One company that's been pretty vocal on the abortion debate in the United States is the online business review platform Yelp. The San Francisco-based company, which operates in 32 countries, focuses on connecting customers with local businesses. It was one of the first in the US to offer to pay the costs if its staff traveled out of their own state for an abortion. And it's been vocal on plenty of other social issues as well. To find out why, I've been speaking to its chief diversity officer. Miriam Warren, a real pleasure having you on my show. Thanks for your time. Miriam, can we start with this? Why have you as a company felt the need to be so vocal and ahead of the curve on the abortion debate in the US?
Well, certainly when we started to see where this was headed, i.e. looking at the state of Texas last year as they were starting to put forth a very restrictive abortion ban, then known as SB 8, we started to recognize that with employees spread across all 50 states here in the US, we would have to really enact some sort of benefit that would allow for them to be able to get the same standard of care regardless of the state that they lived in. And so not only did we want to protect and safeguard our own employees by creating a travel reimbursement to allow them to get abortion care in another state if the state that they lived in had banned it, but we also recognize that our employees, our consumers, and our customers were looking for us to be vocal on this issue. And the reason for that, Erin, is because the vast majority of Americans agree that abortion access should be safe and legal. And for 50 years in America, we have enjoyed the political, legal, and moral safeguards that allow for abortion to be a choice between a person and their doctor. And after the reversal of Roe versus Wade several weeks ago, we have recognized the need to become even more vocal on this issue. And from that, we hear very frequently, not only from our employees with notes of gratitude, but also from people around the country and now even the world on this stance.
But Miriam, some will say this isn't necessarily profitable because, in fact, I mean, it's going to cost you money for the travel of your staff if they want an abortion. So what prompts you to do it? Is it because your staff or your customers want you to?
Well, Erin, in the US, healthcare is incredibly expensive because it is privatized. It is not only for our employees, but it is also for their dependents or their spouses who are covered under our insurance plan. And yes, I think it is also the reason why we speak out on this issue is because it affects so many people. Sometimes people think about abortion as simply a women's issue, but I would say this is a human rights issue. When you look at the progress made over the last 50 years in civic life, in women's careers, in the way that they are certainly not sitting on enough corporate boards, but many more corporate boards than we had seen in the past, is because they have been able to decide whether and when to have children.
You operate in more than 30 countries from Asia to Latin America. What other issues that you mentioned? I mean, what other issues around the world have you felt compelled to take a stance on, and why?
Well, I think fundamentally we've taken stances on issues that are issues of human rights. And so some of the most biggest stances that we have taken most recently have certainly been related to the proliferation of anti-LGBT and specifically anti-transgender youth laws that have been coming about in the United States. Also in similar states that you're seeing abortion bans, places like Texas and also in Florida. And so one of the reasons why we take a stance on that is because members of the LGBTQ community are our friends, they're our colleagues, they're our customers, they're our consumers. And if we don't take a stance with the massive platform that we have available to us, it's really an incredibly missed opportunity on a moral level, on a social level, and also because our employees are saying, hey, we not only want you to have values that are maybe posted on a wiki somewhere or on a wall, we want you to live into those values. And part of those values is that we care about all people, regardless of their gender identity or their sexual orientation.
But there must be times when you speak out about an issue in one country, perhaps trans rights in the United States, which doesn't go down so well in another country, which has, let's say, a less liberal position. How do you balance that?
You know, Erin, I think it's always a balance, and whether you're looking at anti-LGBTQ laws in the US or you're considering things like, again, in the US, gun violence prevention, which is a topic that our CEO has been very vocal about. I think the fundamental thing that we are faced with is really how would we protect human rights in all of the places where our employees are living? And the vast majority of our employees are in North America and then also in the UK and Germany. And so while these topics may not be presenting themselves in quite the same way in different countries, certainly our employee population overall is happy and heartened by the fact that we are speaking out on these issues, as difficult as they may be in some cases.
Miriam, let's talk about the cynics and the critics, because many of them will argue that companies like yourselves, you jump on board with these social issues because it's just good for business, whether you believe in them or not. Is that fair, or how do you show that that's not the case?
Well, I would certainly say this is not a bandwagon situation, and it's certainly not lip service. In order to be as vocal as we have been about this issue, frankly, many corporate actors are silent and potentially attempting to remain neutral on a decision that, frankly, I think neutrality is not going to be looked on favorably, particularly from a historic looking lens.
And you would believe that this kind of corporate activism, it's here and it's going to stay and it's going to grow.
I definitely don't think corporate activism is going away, but I certainly think that in a country like the United States, where the government does not offer things like the rest of the wealthy world, such as paid parental leave, paid sick leave, substantially subsidized childcare, then it is incumbent on employers to answer the
officer at Yelp. Wonderful to have you on my show. Thanks for joining me. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Aaron.
You know, from racism to gender equality, climate change and forced labor, there are so many worthwhile issues out there that as a company, it isn't always easy to work out which are the right or most effective causes to back. Well, more than 220 of the world's biggest companies, from Apple to Coca-Cola and HSBC to Disney, they're all members of an organization called Chief Executives for Corporate Purpose. It helps them work out what they speak out on and how they should do so. And I have been speaking to its big boss. Daryl Brewster, my friend, a real pleasure having you on my show. And Daryl, can we start with this by just explaining in a bit more detail how you work with companies and what you help them to achieve?
We're founded by Paul Newman, the actor salad dressing maker, and other leading CEOs about a quarter of a century ago. And we work with companies to empower them on what we call their purpose journeys. These are the things that CEOs didn't learn about in business school or often on their way to the top, but that are increasingly important in today's world. Things like engagement with your community, sustainable business climate issues, working on diversity, equity, inclusion, engaging your employees, and helping to tell your story.
Well, you mentioned, of course, a very famous actor, Paul Newman, was amongst others who set up the organization. Why did they feel there was a need for something like this?
I think if you go back to the late 90s, last century, you found businesses, this was the day of greed is good, business has one and only responsibility, according to Milton Friedman, and that was to increase profits. And I think while that is an important aspect of what companies are to do, companies realize that to increase profits over time, they need to be good citizens of the world. And this was a time of the tech bubble and other areas, and it's really gained tremendous momentum over the last quarter century. I mean, today, 69 of the world's largest 100 economic units are corporations. The others are countries. So these are big companies. I really can be a positive force for the world, and companies more and more are understanding that to drive sustainable long-term success, they need to be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
And Daryl, according to the Edelman survey that I mentioned at the start of my show, on a global basis, the public regard business as the most effective proponents of positive change. Why do you think that is?
They think what people see around the globe is that businesses are competent, they can get stuff done, they're adaptable, they can change and adjust as time moves on. And I think the other term I like is they're increasingly viewed as ethical. Business is not perfect, let's remember that, but relative to other major institutions like governments and media even, except for the BBC, of course, but except for that, the business is just being a trusted effort. And frankly, and if I don't like what company's doing, I don't have to wait for 4 or 6 years for another election. I can go change my purchase behavior right now.
And Daryl, we know you've been a Chief Executive Officer yourself, running Krispy Kreme donuts. And so I want to know, what are the biggest challenges CEOs face when deciding to speak out on an issue, whilst, of course, still running their company both effectively and profitably?
I used to run Nabisco before Krispy Kreme. I remember one time I was just talking, Oreos is our great global brand. And I think one time we were talking about some of the key public issues, and one of our directors said, just shut up and make the Oreos. Well, that's not the opportunity anymore. Companies need to think through those issues that are relevant to them, how they're going to respond, and maybe even take action before these become major issues.
But Daryl, I'm wondering, When companies are struggling with basics such as surging inflation, this cost of living crisis all around the world, they're worried about just not having enough staff. I mean, do you think we could see less involvement of companies in certain social issues?
Yeah, I think it's going to adjust based on the times. Again, if I go back a decade ago when I was a CEO, very few CEOs ever spoke out. I think as issues hit the murder of George Floyd, social justice issues, climate issues, et cetera, we saw a real surge in how companies were speaking out. And I think today we really, counsel companies to be thoughtful about that approach. You take an example on a global basis of the difference in how companies responded on apartheid in South Africa, which took literally decades for companies to kind of reach mass relative to Ukraine. We're in a matter of days. Over 1,000 companies who had business in Russia and Ukraine had already stepped up on this issue. Kind of the speed of which that has happened has really, accelerated over the last decades.
And Darryl, let me end on this, because when society only seems to be becoming more and more polarized, does that to take a leadership role on some of these issues?
Yes, Aaron, I think it does. I think business's role is to really step up. We have extremists in so many countries around the globe on both sides of areas. But I think business has an opportunity, if not to find common ground, but to find a higher ground that society can move toward.
Darryl Brewster, the big boss of Chief Executives for Corporate Purpose, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. And I'll check in with you soon.
All right. Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate it.
Well, that's it for this week's show. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget, you can keep up with all the latest on the global economy on the BBC News website and the smartphone app. You can also follow me on Twitter. Tweet me. I'll tweet you back. You can get me at BBC Aaron. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.